Life Squared, a novel written by and read by George Trombley. Are you all right, buddy? Huh? George looked up from his phone. The elderly taxi driver was looking at him through the rearview mirror with a concerned look. You said, "Are you kidding me?" just now. George hadn't realized he said it aloud. Did you forget something at the terminal? Thinking fast, George said, "No, sorry. The guy that was supposed to cover my shift at work backed out last minute." Figures, the taxi driver said with a sigh. People nowadays only think about themselves. It's a crying shame. It's the end of the country, I tell you. Yeah, it'll be okay, I think, George said. You know you can't let him off easy like that. He'll just do it again. George tried to end the conversation. Yeah, I'll be sure to give him a piece of my mind. The taxi driver kept talking. Let me guess. The kid's an alpha, right? This generation has everything handed to them on a platter and lets Omni do all of their thinking. They would rather die than have to schedule a doctor's appointment or send a goddamn email. George always thought it funny how older generations conveniently ignored that they too had it better than the prior generations. Sure, the Alpha generation had Omni, but Gen Z had the internet and Alexa. George responded as neutrally as he could. True. George saw the Whiskey House's sign at the intersection. You can just drop me off near the next light. Sure thing, the taxi driver said. He tipped the driver $20 in cash and got out of the taxi. The hostess at the entrance recognized him from the other night. Welcome back. Meeting with your girlfriend again? Maybe, George answered, looking to the back of the restaurant. Mind if I take the same table as before? Sure. Can you find your way? She said, smiling. I think I might be able to, George said, nodding his head to her as he headed back to the booth. He sent a text to Kim. Hey, what are you up to? Oh, what a surprise. I didn't think I'd hear from you so soon. Did you find out you're dying or something? No, I was just thinking maybe we could redo the Whiskey House. Sure. When were you thinking? I'm open tomorrow if you are. Actually, I was in the neighborhood. How about now? How spontaneous of you. I was planning to leave at 3, but I think for you, I can make an exception. Great. I'm in the same booth. Just order me one of what you're getting. I'm starving. See you soon. George swiped to the news app. In the cab, George only had time to read the headline before the driver began his rant against the Alpha generation. He opened the full article and read. A Chula Vista man is dead from injuries sustained in an unprovoked attack at the Locos Tacos in downtown San Diego. Witnesses claim a man grabbed another man by the neck, then thrust-kicked the deceased, who fell headfirst into a concrete table, causing severe brain injury. The man was pronounced dead just after 3 p.m. at UC San Diego Health. It's been reported that the unknown assailant and another man fled on foot. The police aren't able to comment on an active investigation, but request that the men contact them to answer some questions. If you have any information about this event, you can call our Crime Stopper line or submit information anonymously via our Omni reporter. George was dumbfounded. Unprovoked? Were the witnesses blind? It was worse than he expected. He could now only hope there was CCTV camera footage showing the 3 men attacking first. The waitress cheerily arrived at the booth. Have you had time to look at the menu? George hadn't eaten since last night. Let me have 2 vegan tri-tip meals with corn for the sides and 2 waters for now, he said, handing the waitress the food menu. Once my friend arrives, we'll order some drinks as well, George said, tapping his good hand on the drink menu. Kim showed up a few minutes later and scooted in next to George. George held his wrapped hand under the table. Tell me you saw the news, she said excitedly. I did, he said. We were just there. We could have been killed. George felt a knot in his stomach. It wasn't our time, I guess. What kind of animal just randomly kills someone? Kim said, shaking her head. I'm sure they had their reasons, George said, not thinking about how that sounded. Reasons? Well, I mean, maybe the guys knew each other and the man he killed had threatened him or his family, and he felt the need to protect his loved ones, George said, trying to soften the blow if Kim found out he was the killer. That's what the police are for, Kim said. If people can just kill someone because they feel threatened, the world would fall apart. You're right, George said, not wanting to keep talking about it. The waitress came at the perfect time. Welcome to the Whiskey House. The gentleman told me that you might want to order drinks after you arrived. Have you had a moment to look at the drink menu? He knows me well, Kim said, smiling towards George. I'll take a Singapore Sling, heavy on the pineapple. And for the gentleman? I'll have a Moscow Mule. Excellent choice, the waitress said. I'll keep the drink menu here in case one drink isn't enough. One drink won't be enough for sure, George sighed. Kim was looking at George with a concerned look. Does she know something? George waited for her to talk. So, promise me you won't get mad, Kim said, making an innocent face. George's heart was sick of beating out of his chest. Mad about what? He asked. I visited your client yesterday. George had more than one client, but he knew exactly who she meant. You met Square? I did, she answered. George's head started to pound, and he was visibly irritated. You promised me you wouldn't do any more research, and now you tell me you actually visited him? Calm down. I didn't say I wouldn't do any more research. I said I would hold off a bit, and that was weeks ago. Don't worry, I just rode the elevator with him, she said. How do you even know what he looks like? It wasn't too hard. I had the picture from the debate article. I noticed a mole on his upper left ear. I just looked for a man in his 50s or 60s with that mole. You found a man in his 50s with a mole in the forest of a super skyscraper? Kim further explained. Public relations isn't all about putting out press releases and data scrubbing, you know. Half of my job is opposition research. I'm no stranger to stalking a target. So exactly how did you find this needle in a haystack? With all of those crime books you read, you would certainly know by now that people are predictable. Do you think that Square would enter the building from just any old entrance? So you mean you found the staff entrance? You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to find it, but it wasn't easy since nothing's labeled. But staff doors are the only doors with access control to prevent normies like me from going in. All the other entrances for the public are unlocked, or they're air curtains. It took me less than an hour to blend in with the other tourists and casually walk the perimeter of the park. Eventually I came across 2 doors that OmniGuide told me access was restricted. I had planned to go 2 days in a row if the first door wasn't Square's door, but I lucked out. So you stalked the door? George asked. No, I just took a book to the park, which is, as you know, open 24 hours. I found a bench with good visibility, and around 8:50 a.m., a man in his 50s came through the staff door. I got close enough to see the mole and followed him to the elevator. And he didn't think this was strange? Come on, George. It wasn't too hard. I just got in the same elevator and asked Omni to take me to the observation deck. I didn't know there was an observation deck, George said. There isn't, of course. I already knew this, but Square didn't know I did. He was like, Ma'am, this building doesn't have an observation deck. Kim paused to smile. Then he told me the elevator was restricted to staff. But here's where it gets good, Kim said as she squinted her eyes in a smile. I should have earned an Emmy for this part, she laughed to herself, then continued. I made the best sad face I could and began slowly walking off the elevator. And then Square saved a damsel in distress and invited me to the 100th floor to get a view of the city from his office. You were right. The office is humongous. Square gave me a bird's-eye tour of San Diego. He was quite charming, actually. I even saw your little workout area. Maybe it was the stress of all that had happened, but George was angered. Even though it was Square that got duped by Kim, George somehow felt violated by her actions. You are unbelievable. This guy has done nothing wrong, he said, showing his anger. Kim wasn't smiling anymore. George, Square is dirty, I'm sure of it. You don't get to a position like that without rolling around in the dirt. George pounded his good fist on the table. The only thing Square is guilty of is working for a company that you think is involved in one of your crazy conspiracy theories. Kim had enough. Crazy theories? She didn't seem to care if anyone heard her. Yes, Kim. Not everything's a conspiracy, you know. The links you sent about letter were filled with conjecture and guesses. You are so naive, George. I don't have enough fingers on both of my hands to count how many wars were fought by this country on a lie. You know what's crazy? A person who lives with his nose buried in books, ignoring all that goes around him, never questioning anyone's motives. Thanks for letting me know how you feel, though. It makes this easy. Kim got up from the table. She took a moment to look at George as if she wanted to remember his face. She shook her head and began to cry as she turned around and stormed out. This time George thought for sure she wouldn't be coming back. Chapter 7. George. Kim hadn't sent any text messages or called since the blow-up. George did his best to put her and the taco stand out of his mind. The book he was currently reading about a woman who murdered her boyfriend didn't help. George wasn't sure if it was over with Kim or not, but when a 29-year-old attractive woman booked a first-time evaluation session with him for Tuesday afternoon, he thought maybe fate was sending him a signal. George's clients tended to be older, well-off people with trouble self-motivating themselves to work out. 29-year-olds weren't often able to afford an expensive trainer. In 3 years, Kim had been George's only under 30 client, and even she tried to negotiate downwards. The woman's name on her 2-day-old profile was Amelia Trimble, and her stated goal was to enter my 30s gracefully. The downtown gym was packed with middle-aged men and women running on treadmills. George arrived a few minutes before the 12:15 start time. The gym was run down and smelled a bit like a wet dog and an old tire swing. A woman standing near the female locker room appeared to be waiting for someone. She sported a hot pink top revealing her midriff and black yoga pants fitting her well-formed body that left nothing to the imagination. George approached. She noticed him and with a tilt of her head said, "George?" "Amelia," George looked at her profile. "Trimble?" "Yes, the one and only." Her large smile revealed her perfect teeth. George was surprised at how fit she looked. Her muscles had proper tone and were well defined. "So I see from your profile you've never had a trainer." "Nope, you're my first." "You already seem so fit. Do you mind if I ask why you think you need a trainer?" "I'll take that as a compliment," she said, shaking her head as if she were saying no. "But I assure you my looks are more genetics than dedication to my health. I haven't been to the gym in years." "Those are some amazing genetics." "And why now?" George asked. 2 reasons. First, my 30th birthday is on the 3rd, and second, I don't want to end up like my mother. This session is a present to my future self, I guess. "Your mother is in poor health?" George asked. Actually, she passed away last summer from a heart attack. She looked healthy, but trust me, she wasn't. "I see. Well, you could probably just watch some health guru videos and save $250 an hour." Amelia furrowed her eyebrows. "Are you trying to convince me not to be your client?" "No, I'm not one to spend money when I don't have to. And it doesn't seem fair to take your money when there are more inexpensive ways to attain your goals." "Well, I appreciate your honesty. I considered other options, but in my mother's final letter to me, she told me to spare no expense on my health, so I wouldn't end up like her. And here I am," she smiled. "Okay, I understand. Sorry for the inquisition. I'm going to ask you to keep a food log for the next week so we can look at your food choices. I'll send you guidelines and—" Amelia interrupted him. "I'll just send you my Opium link. It knows everything I've eaten for years. Does that work?" George had used Opium links a few times prior, but most of his older clients didn't like omnipresence mode watching everything they do, even if it was easier. Nowadays, most trainers asked for Opium links, but George only required simple food and daily routine logs. "Yes, your Opium data should be fine." "Great." Amelia sent the Opium link to George. "Got it. I'll analyze it and send you any tweak recommendations." George knew most people her age already got recommendations from Omni Health, but he still included food log analysis with his first session, as he liked to understand the client's routine. George began the session by explaining how the equipment worked and the effect the exercises would have on related muscle groups. He then directed her through a series of exercises. Except for her unusually young age, Amelia's session was progressing as normal as any other new client's. That is until Amelia asked George a question that, in normal circumstances, might have passed for small talk. Near the end of her second set of rope pulls, Amelia asked, "Did anything interesting happen last week?" It was an odd question and took George by complete surprise. It might have shown on his face because Amelia picked up on it. "Oh, sorry. It seems like something upsetting must have happened last week." Am I getting paranoid? George tried to keep his composure. "Actually, something pretty bad did happen last week," George confessed. Amelia stopped her rope pulls and focused on George's next words. "My girlfriend broke up with me. We had been dating for almost a year. I really love her." "Oh my gosh. With the face you made, I thought someone had died." "Why would she say that?" No one died, just my heart," George said, trying not to show how suspicious he now felt. "Oh, I'm sorry that happened to you," Amelia said, starting her third set of rope pulls. "Was she cheating on you? Or maybe you got caught cheating?" "No, nothing like that. I'm not even sure if it's over. But it feels over." George instructed her on the next exercise. Amelia spoke no more about the breakup, and the conversation was, fortunately for George, light until the end of the session. Amelia thanked George for a great workout, but curiously didn't book or discuss future sessions, which is customary. It wasn't uncommon for clients to end with one session. Maybe they just wanted an initial push or were curious about the free diet evaluation he included. But Amelia didn't even hint at future contact. Who is this Amelia? On Wednesday, George had 2 sessions with existing clients, but mostly Amelia was on his mind. Her age, her story, her uncomfortable question. After his evening session ended, he went home and opened Amelia's opium link. I should at least do the evaluation. George opened the OmniHealth data link, isolating Amelia's health and food activities for the last 30 days. There was data from every meal she ate, every time her heart rate was elevated, and even her bowel movements were tracked. This level of data felt so intrusive to George. How is this not stalking? And why are people okay with this invasion of privacy? George looked at her macros and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then something caught his eye. Curious. This can't be right. He went back to the original data parameters and zoomed out to the last 60 days, then 90, then 120 days. From random days, he looked at lunchtime meals and copied them into a separate document. Amelia ate out every day. George copied, then pasted the name of each lunch dish and the day Amelia ate it into the document. Then he pasted the name of each of the dishes into a search engine. George didn't need to look at any more data. The data doesn't lie. Every search result made it clearer than the last. Amelia was a problem. Chapter 8. George. The sound of heavy breathing filled the room. The room was completely dark except for a dim blue light emanating from a 7-segment digital alarm clock set to 8 a.m. The time ticked up to 6:49, slightly changing the light profile hitting the half-drunk glass of water placed in front of it the night before. Laying in the bed next to the alarm was a man whose body was intertwined with the bed sheets and a light summer blanket. His eyes were moving rapidly, indicating a deep REM sleep. The sound of a fan blowing a gentle breeze over his body gave a false indication that all was calm. But all was not calm behind the eyelids of the sleeping man. A large, cleanly shaven, bald-headed man held a knife tightly against the silky white neck of a beautiful, slender Asian woman with long, blonde-streaked black hair. The bald man was flanked on either side by 2 even larger men wearing black leather jackets, well-worn jeans, and steel-tipped cowboy boots. The sleeping man faced the 3 men in a defensive posture. He was weaponless and numerically disadvantaged. A billion thoughts a second rushed through his mind as he calculated a plan of attack. Locking his eyes on the wrist of the hand holding the knife to the woman's neck, he lunged with the ferocity of a lion, extending his right arm toward the wrist. His open hand clumsily clasped empty air, and with a sound of bones breaking, the would-be hero crashed to the ground. The bald man, just inches away from the clenched fists of the man on the ground, let out a maniacal belly laugh as the other 2 men stepped closer to the fallen hero. The failed hero's legs and arms made of jello and devoid of bones and any solid structure were unable to lift his body to fighting position. With each relentless kick of the steel tips of the cowboy boots, the man's remaining bones cracked and fractured. A glass-breaking scream came from the woman's mouth. Reaching her arms to the now blood-soaked man, she struggled in vain to escape the grip of the man holding a knife to her throat. The man on the ground looked up to witness the bald man unceremoniously slicing the woman's throat from ear to ear. Her body collapsed to the ground as her eyes maintained her intense stare into the eyes of the man with 1,000 broken bones. George jolts awake. Sweat-drenched sheets cling to his legs and torso as his lower lip shivers and his body shudders involuntarily. The tears falling from his eyes intensify once it dawns on him that his real life might not be any better than the nightmare. George laid in the bed, looking up to the ceiling for another half hour. Curtains on the only window struggled to prevent the rising sun's photons from penetrating into his dark space. He eventually sat up and finished the water on the nightstand. Each gulp of water lessened the shock of the nightmare, but did nothing to fix the hole he had gotten himself into with Kim. His thoughts now moved back to the taco stand. He wiped tears from his eyes and picked up his phone. No news is good news. An entire week had passed. There were no more taco stand murder-related headlines, and George continued to believe that if the police knew who George or Square were, one of them would have already been brought in for questioning. During an extended shower, George ran scenario after scenario in his head about how he was going to address the Amelia problem with Square. What possibly could he say? George wanted to be absolutely sure he wasn't wrong. He left his apartment an hour earlier than usual for his training session with Square. Today, he would walk. An early morning shadow extended in front of George as he headed towards the imposing letter building. It was only 40 or so minutes by foot, but George didn't walk a direct path. As he got close, he turned down a side street and saw the red and blue neon of the Gaslamp Surf and Turf restaurant. In front of the restaurant, he briefly paused to investigate a framed menu attached to the still locked doors. Satisfied, he walked further down the street to a large lot filled with catering trucks not yet opened for the lunch crowd. After snapping a photo of the side of a truck with a large Canadian flag on it called Poutine Central, he moved to another truck claiming it had the best sushi wraps this side of the Pacific Ocean. There was no doubt in his mind. With each confirmation, he got angrier. It was 10:32 a.m. when the whoosh of the air curtain at the main entrance to the letter building washed over George's body. George stood for a moment, letting the cool air dry his sweat. He stood empty-handed, staring into the forest. He wasn't going to need his equipment today. There was a slight drizzle during the walk towards the park. By the time George arrived at East 2 elevator, his body had cooled and his clothes were damp. He almost wished he had brought a jacket. The elevator was empty, but George's head was full of imaginary conversation fragments he was saying to Square in his head. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor, and the young brown-haired girl who delivered tea in Square's office the other day entered the elevator pushing a food cart. Floor 80 was added to the destination panel. George said hi, and the young girl, who couldn't be more than 18, briefly looked at George and then quickly averted her glance, looking down at the food on her cart. Deja vu again. The elevator door opened at floor 80. From the door, George saw large metallic letters that said, "The Sweets," on a wall opposite the elevator doors. The girl continued to look at the cart as she turned left and headed down a hallway of doors. George's thoughts were momentarily distracted by the girl, giving him a short reprieve from the anger he felt about Square's betrayal. The doors closed, and 7 seconds later, they opened on floor 100, revealing Square's round desk with the large monitors hanging from the ceiling. George walked in and was greeted by Omni. "Good morning, George. It seems you are a few minutes early. Mr. Puppenmacher should be here in a few minutes. We are sorry for the inconvenience. I've prepared you 2 bottles of Shizen on the table near the guest seats." "I won't be here that long. Please let Square know I want to talk to him immediately," George said as calmly as he could. "I will relay the message. It seems that you are upset about something. Is there anything I can do to ease the situation?" "You just relay the message. I don't need to be psychoanalyzed by a chatty AI. The best thing you can do is keep quiet." Omni responded, "Understood." The walk had left him parched. George walked over to the guest seats and grabbed one of the bottles of Shizen tea. The mannequins were again different, and then he saw it. What the hell? This guy. Wow. The mannequin on the left of the chairs was a dead ringer for Square, down to the mole on his upper left ear. George walked around the mannequin. Despite his anger, he was still impressed at the level of detail. The mannequin's arm was covered in thousands or tens of thousands of individual arm hair follicles. How many hair follicles were on one arm anyway? The body was a perfect match to what George saw when Square was naked. "Omni, is this some sort of clone?" There was no response. "Omni, I take back what I said. You can respond. What is Square doing here?" Omni spoke. "All information related to the Life Extension Program is limited from my programming." "Don't you think that's weird?" George asked. A voice from the back of the room answered. "There's too much at stake. Do you think the food preparers working at the Los Alamos cafeteria during the Manhattan Project knew they were working on an atomic bomb that could kill millions of people?" George turned to see Square. "Are you saying you're going to kill millions of people?" "I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that details for projects of this magnitude are need-to-know basis," Square answered, then looked towards the ceiling. "Omni, disable until 2 p.m. "Chances are high that I won't be here until 2 p.m. "Oh?" Square had a surprised look on his face. So he's gonna play innocent. George decided to be direct. "Who's Amelia, and why did you send her to spy on me?" Square blinked a few times and looked up as if he were trying to recall someone named Amelia. "I don't think I know anyone by that name." "I'm fairly certain you do," George insisted. Are you sure you aren't mistaken? Square asked. You thought you were so smart sending your spy to a training session. It might have worked, but you underestimate my inherent distrust for people. I gave you the benefit of the doubt, but I see now you couldn't keep your word. George, why would I spy on you? And why would I send someone when I have access to millions of opium feeds? Are you sure that this woman isn't just investigating the incident at the taco shop? Square suggested. You know, the thought had crossed my mind, but your own technology ratted you out, George said, stepping into Square's personal space. Square, feeling the tension, said, There's no need to get physical. He stepped back, putting space between him and George. Tell me what makes you think this Amelia woman was hired by me and not an investigator? George decided to give Square a taste of his own debating medicine. Let me ask you a few questions, and you tell me what you think. Okay, Square said confidently. First, what type of person eats consistently at restaurants within 200 feet of the Letter Building over a 6-month period? Second, what person stops to eat a protein bar and veggie shake 3 days a week at the very gym she claims to have not visited in years? Square was silent for a few moments and then spoke. I know when I've been caught, George. Please let me explain. Let me guess, George said, pounding his fist on Square's desk. You did it to save mankind? You are the almighty savior and nothing you do matters as long as the goal is noble, George said in a mocking tone. Look, you have every right to be angry, but I'm sure you can understand why I had to be certain you weren't going to jeopardize decades of effort. If you truly understood what I'm trying to accomplish here, it would all make sense. I'd rather not hear any more of your messiah complex. I've got enough information to know that you aren't a man of your word. But you know what, Square? Unlike you, I can keep my word. You keep your mouth shut about tacos, and I'll honor the non-disclosure agreement. Beyond that, we are done. George grabbed the partially drunk Shizen bottle and pocketed the unopened one. Thanks for the tea. He headed for the elevator. George, please don't make this mistake. Let me have the chance to show you that none of this is a delusion, Square pleaded. You already used up your second chance, he said, stepping into the East 2 elevator. Let me at least pay you for your time, Square said, raising his hand. I don't need any more money from you. The door sealed shut, and the elevator panel displayed, next destination, the park. The elevator doors opened, and as George stepped out, he hadn't noticed that the forest was completely devoid of people. At this time, there would normally be a stream of tourists coming down the paths, taking photos in front of the fauna or sitting on blankets eating a snack. The late morning light of the park dimmed slightly, and lightning flashed behind George as he neared the pond closest to the East 2 elevator. A second later, the sound of thunder reverberated through the forest, followed by a drizzle that almost instantly turned into a squall. Lightning flashed again, and more thunder rumbled. George wasn't sure if he was hearing people clapping and cheering, or if it was just the sound of the rainstorm. Heavy drops of rain slammed into George's unprotected body, completely soaking him. Perfect. The irony wasn't lost on George that his life had fallen apart, and now it was raining, just like in every dramatic movie scene. The rain lightened as George approached the air curtain. Immediately after he passed through the whoosh of air, a loud voice over a megaphone yelled at George. San Diego PD, put your hands above your head and get down on your knees. Oh, fuck. George stopped and complied with the police instructions, raising his hands in the air. Down on your knees, the megaphone blasted again. George put his good knee down to the ground. Is one good enough? My other knee doesn't do so well on the ground. Down now! The police had their weapons drawn. George took a deep breath and on the exhale put his other knee to the ground, ignoring the pain. 3 of the 5 officers surrounded George and one handcuffed his arms behind his back. You are under arrest for the murder of Alexander Abarca. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to speak to an attorney and to have an attorney present during any questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be provided for you at government expense. George took the officer's advice and didn't say anything. He was loaded into an SDPD patrol car. The seats in the car were hard plastic, and a steel mesh wall was between him and the officers in the front. George hung his head. Fate had once again caught up with him.